Hello students, let's start our very first chapter of Hornbill, The Portrait of a Lady, written by Khushwant Singh. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. It's very clear what does writer want to say here. My grandmother means Khushwant Singh is saying his grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. The way our grandmother is old, in the same way his grandmother was also old. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband. But that was hard to believe. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and loose fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of children. So here students, you can easily understand grandmother of Khushwant Singh, she was very old, and Khushwant Singh says over here that he knew his grandmother for last 20 years and he had been old and wrinkled for these 20 years. He had never seen his grandmother pretty, young, or any change on her face. The way she was 20 years before, in the same way she was now. So that's why he says that it was hard to believe that she was pretty in her young age. Then he talks about his grandfather. His grandfather's portrait was hung over there in the drawing room, and the way it is described that he had very long beard, he was wearing very loose fitting clothes. It seems that this person, he is also that in late time when he was quite old, that time this portrait was made. That's why it was not of his young age. And the writer says he looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren, but he could not have wife. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, in the same way that grandmother says that they say that grandmother was young and pretty, it is hard to believe. The thought was almost revolting. The thought was almost revolting means it was hard to believe. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child. When she was young, when grandmother was young that time, whatever game she used to play, that she relates to all, she tells all the things to Khushwant Singh, and that he says that it was hard to believe. That seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Fables means stories and prophets means religious teacher. The way religious teachers keeps on telling various stories, moral based stories, in the same way those stories were taken that were told by grandmother about her childhood and about all the games that she played. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. This is the physique that is described over here in the chapter about grandmother. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. This expression shows that his grandmother was very old and her face was completely wrinkled, crisscross of wrinkles. No, we were certain, she said, she had always been as we had known her. Old, so terribly old, that she could not have grown older. That more than that, she can't be older. She was that old and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. See, grandson is saying that she could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. She hobbled about the house. Hobbled means children walk with difficulty. She was very old, so she walked with difficulty. About the house in spotless white, with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop. Stoop means bend. She had a bend in her body, so that's why she wanted to balance it. How to balance it? One hand resting on her waist. She used to wear spotless white attire, and the other telling the beads of her rosary. Rosary is it's a beads, a chain of beads, that is rosary. So the other telling means other hand the beads of her rosary. That other hand was telling beads of her rosary means that it was telling about that she kept on counting them and kept on praying. Old people usually they keep on counting beads and they keep on praying. They keep on just taking the name of Almighty. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face. Pale means no energy. Very tired. Puckered face means wrinkled face. So her silver locks means her hairs, her hairs turned white, was scattered untidily, not properly, tidily, they were not done up properly, and over her pale puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer, and her lips constantly, continuously moved in inaudible prayer. The prayer was not audible, but she kept on just mumbling the prayer under breath. She kept on chanting something about Almighty, just in the praise of Almighty. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. So here he says about his grandmother that she had silver hair and her lips constantly moved in an inaudible prayer. She presented a picture of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. Her inner beauty, whose grandmother's, her inner beauty radiate on her face, making her an epitome of peace and contentment. This he wants to say through these lines. Age wise, also, she was in the winter of her life, and the way she was in her attire, that time also, it seems that an expanse of pure white serenity. My grandmother and I were good friends. From here, the story starts of these two. Till now, it was explained about grandmother. Now, he is telling about the story between two of them. My grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. So these two were staying together when parents, whose parents? Khushwant Singh's parents, they left him with his grandmother in the village. What she used to do? She was quite aware lady about education also. She was quite serious to educate her grandson. That's why she used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing song while she bathed and dressed me in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. So in a monotonous way means monotonous is used over here because the same way routine work kind of she used to sing her morning prayers, keep on singing while bathing the child, while dressing him, while making him ready for the school. So it was somewhere hoped by grandmother that he would listen and he would understand and he would learn. it would be by heart by Khushwant Singh, because she wanted to give such kind of legacy to Khushwant Singh. I listened because I loved her voice, but never bothered to learn it. As young generation always behave in different way, so he was also behaved in different way. It was not willingly, but ignorantly. He says that he loved her voice, that's why he heard all those, he listened all that she she sang, but he never bothered to learn them. Then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen, tie them all in a bundle, and hand it to me. So no pencil box was there, no geometry box was there, no pouch were there. So what was there? One slate was there. Okay, and slate was plastered with yellow chalk. Why? Because it was the only way that a tiny earthen ink pot can be used, that is with red pen on that slate. No stationery is mentioned over here. It means older times, very old time of Khushwant Singh's childhood. After a breakfast of thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. So one stale chapati was that, a thick stale chapati for child also, with a little butter and sugar spread on it. And on the way to school, when they both went to school, that grandmother took grandson to school. That time several stale chapatis she used to keep in her hand to feed village dogs. My grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. So she always went to school with her grandson. Why? Because there was a attached to temple. School was there, and just adjacent to school there was a temple. The priest taught us the alphabet and the morning prayer, while the children sat in rows on either side of the veranda singing the alphabet or the prayer in a chorus. My grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. When we had both finished, we would walk back together. So, grandmother used to recite scriptures over there, reading scriptures over there in the temple, and by that time, child was learning their own syllabus. When we had both finished, when both of the work were finished, when his school got finished and her prayers and scriptures were read by her, that time they we would walk back together, and that time they used to, here would is children, would is used as an old habit. We would walk back together. Would is also used as old habit, as used to is for old habit and old state of something. Would is used for old habit. This time the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. So here in this way they spent their childhood, that he spent his childhood with his grandmother in village. They really enjoyed each other's company. Grandmother was quite aware to make his grandson study, and the way she had taken all the responsibility on her shoulders, it is quite good. And the way grandmother, that she did not only manage herself but she managed grandson also along with her, along with the with feeding dogs and all the things. So in such way grandmother is described over here, that very old lady, completely old lady, that a good life she was leading with grandson, and just kept on teaching all good ways, all good that recitation on Almighty. Somewhere she wanted that it will good for Khushwant Singh to by heart all of them. Okay, so in next we will read how this relationship will have a turning point. It's written that was a turning point. From here we will start with another video tomorrow. Okay.